in planning stages around the world. So in the meantime, health officials are scrambling to get enough COVID-19 tests up to build the capacity to care for a looming surge in patients. Right now, the most effective way to fight the virus remains not getting infected in the first place, which means good personal hygiene like hand washing and social distancing measures. So you can stay home and not do anything stupid. If you go out, wear a mask, wash your hands when you get back, etc. So another one of these mind-boggling aspects of the coronavirus, Vanity Fair reports here, in America is the fact that one of the wealthiest countries in the world does not have the basic medical supplies to deal with the situation. In addition to a lack of beds, hospitals across the nation have nowhere near the number of ventilators and masks doctors require to do their jobs and protect themselves. While governors have pleaded with Donald Trump to help them and obtain such equipment, he's literally told them that they're on their own, seemingly forgetting the fact that he's the one with all the power here. For instance, he can invoke the Defense Production Act, which you heard Joe Biden earlier in the show begging him to do. Bernie Sanders, other Democrats, and some Republicans, I believe, as well, have begged him to take this control, which allows the federal government to take some control over the private sector, socialism, oh my gosh, to ensure production of materials relevant to national defense. But Trump, he can do this, and yet he's chosen not to. Why? Because corporate CEOs don't like the idea, and the president's more concerned with keeping big business happy than keeping Americans alive, as we just talked about with my dad. So, yes, according to the New York Times, U.S. Chamber of Commerce and heads of major corporations have lobbied the administration against using the act, arguing that it could impose red tape on companies at a time when they need the government out of their hair. They need to do this. Unsurprisingly, free market diehard Larry Kudlow, i.e. Trump's never-right National Economic Council director, was persuaded by such arguments, as was Trump's well-known genius son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and said the Trump Brain Trust has insisted that it can convince businesses to help bridge the shortfall of vital medical supplies without making such a formal demand, an initiative that has thus far had such predictable results. Again, from the New York Times here, the government has essentially thrown out its existing playbook for dealing with pandemics, seizing the issue from the Department of Health and Human Services and moving to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. But it is far from clear that efforts to enlist companies like General Motors, Apple, and Haynes, just a few of the firms that have promised to free up existing supplies of masks or repurpose 3D printers to produce ventilator parts, constitutes an effective strategy. In interviews with participants in the process, from business executives to government officials, there is still widespread confusion about how much and exactly what each firm is supposed to produce. Corporate executives say they face a bewildering number of requests from dozens of nations around the world, along with governors and mayors from around the country for scarce supplies. The White House has not said who will set the priority list for deliveries, and it is not clear that any of it will arrive in time for cities and states that are hit the hardest, including New York. Administration officials asked why they have been reluctant to use the full force of the DPA, Defense Production Act, to press industry into action, say the country is not in such dire straits. There is plenty of volunteer cooperation, they say, and there is always the implicit threat of ordering mandatory measures if they do not. Trump, at the news briefings, he suggested an ideological concern. We're not a country based on nationalizing our businesses. Please shut up. Like, it is so crazy, because this is a situation that, like, you need to have this available. You need to have this on the table in a big way, because you gotta, like, this is something that is incredibly critical to enforcing widespread results and widespread cooperation, when it comes to getting things done in a more efficient way. Like, all cards should be on the table here, to say the least. Like, this is something that we need to have a big discussion over, and the possibility that this is not something that gets done, it's very disturbing and very worrying. So that's something to definitely take. The Defense Production Act, aka the Socialism Act, which allows the government to take control of the private sector to make them to produce coronavirus protection supplies quicker. That is something that is very much a big and disturbing, a big help, but it's very, very disturbing that they do not make that effort to happen sooner. So it is something that, like, I really hope that they finally relent and they put enough pressure on this, like Fauci gets them or something. I don't even know. But he needs to stamp out the influence of these people like Larry Kudlow, these people like Jared Kushner out there who said, "Oh yeah, like kids, even if they want to help, the White House is taking no leadership role in getting them to help and pushing, saying, here goes, this is what goes here, this is what goes here. We need to send this here." And like, you need someone, a task manager, and you need the White House to come in and do that. So, that's why this is really so important. For the second time in less than 24 hours, also, this is something we do want to get to, a largely united Senate Democratic caucus on Monday stopped Republicans from advancing a nearly $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package that progressives have characterized as a massive bailout for corporate America that leaves ordinary people out to dry. The procedural motion on the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act, which one Senate Democrats derided as a show vote, failed by a margin of 49 to 46 with just one Democrat, Doug Jones of Alabama, joining the Republicans in voting yes. Robert Reich, the former Secretary of Labor, urged the U.S. public not to listen to pundits trying to spin the vote as a bad move by Democrats in the midst of a global health crisis. Senate Dems were right to reject the corporate bailout, saying, quote, "It creates a $500 billion slush fund for corporations that Mnuchin has complete control over." Oh, I shudder at that thought. Wow. Oh. $500 billion that Mnuchin can give to corporations whenever he wants. That is insane. It provides a one-time $1,200 check and just $600 for those who need it most. Yeah, so not much. Like, you think, $1,200 for Americans. That doesn't quite get the job done, to say the least. One time, we're talking about one time check here. I don't know about this. I really do not know about this. We also have Senate Democrats, including joining progressive advocacy groups, unions, and others, that have criticized the CARES Act as a business-friendly measure that would establish a $500 billion slush fund. This is a big thing that's been trending all day today for big corporations while doing little to protect workers or provide much needed economic relief to the public. So they can give money to these companies. But as you were talking about with my dad, like, what's to say they don't just throw the money up and dance around in it? Like, that's literally all they could do. And they've done that before in the past. They've devoted that mostly to stock buybacks. And you can't just say, oh, well, you better not do those stock buybacks. Please don't do that. Like, if it's such a big problem that, and no one's ever going to even possibly think about doing stock buybacks, then what's the big objection to putting them in the bill in the first place and making it federally illegal to do so? Like, that is what I don't get. Like, why don't you just at least want to have that insurance and put all the things that I talked about in the last show that Elizabeth Warren had a list of on her conditions for bailouts. So, yeah, Republicans Party is giving no strings attached bailouts and letting the virus spread by shortchanging health care providers and states. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut tweeted following the vote Monday, "That's a recipe for disaster. Why on earth would anyone support that?" So here's Chris Murphy on the floor talking about what the problem is.
You can't keep on saying it's a bipartisan bill when it clearly is not. If it was a bipartisan bill, you wouldn't have this level of angst from Democrats who were shut out of the process. Let's be clear about what we're talking about here. We don't think your bill works. We don't think the bill that has been drafted by the majority party is going to fix the problem. This is a policy disagreement, and I have an obligation as a representative of my state to stand up and say when I don't think a $2 trillion bill is going to fix the problem. It may make a lot of people rich, but it doesn't have the resources in it today to take care of the most vulnerable in this country, and it's not going to do the primary job at hand, which is to stop the virus. Remember, there's no amount of economic stimulus that we can pass, $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion, that will solve this problem if we don't get serious about the public health crisis that exists today. And when you shortchange states, when you don't provide enough money to help my state and my municipalities manage testing, move congregate populations apart from each other.
Like, yeah, like
Try
they
to
give no
manage
money to
the
New York in this
crisis,
bill, which is also pretty
then
crazy.
You aren't serious about stopping the virus. And so, yes, one of the outstanding issues in this bill is that we think we need more funding for the states and municipalities that are on the front lines of fighting the virus. And yes, we don't think this bill will work at job number one, which is stopping the public health crisis, unless we provide ample funding. And yes, we are worried about the lack of conditionality on funding to big businesses, to Wall Street. Yes, we are worried about the fact that this is going to make rich people much richer, and at the same time not actually stopping the public health crisis. These are policy differences. And instead of coming down here and having show vote after show vote, we should be sitting together and trying to resolve differences that, frankly, I don't think are so large that they can't be solved within the next several hours. And so I just hope that we understand that we are down here very frustrated because we worry that we are about to vote on a bill that is not going to solve the problem. That is a
Yeah, so there you have it. That is a bill that I think it was very good to see this in the Democrats. Like, it's not something that I would have expected them to do in the first place. I would expect Chuck and Nancy to be like, oh, we have to let it pass, or they're going to say that we don't care about solving the crisis. They're going to get mad at us. The media's going to yell at us. They're going to be a threat to our frontline Democrats. Like that is the typical Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer move. But no, they're holding strong, so give them credit for that. We'll be following that for sure in the future. So I want to end here on this fire article by Paul Bless. The Spirit of 9/15 is what it's called. So in the days after the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando 4 years ago, then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton called on Americans to remember a time after another national tragedy where we all banded together as one. We didn't attack each other. We worked together. We worked with each other to protect our country and to rebuild, Clinton said. It's time to get back to the spirit of those days, the spirit of 9/12. This rosy-eyed view of the immediate aftermath of 9/11 was widely ridiculed at the time, especially on the left. To whatever meager degree it's true we didn't attack each other after 9/11, Brendan O'Connor wrote for Gawker, pointing out that Muslim Americans were very much indeed not included in this, very much not included in this national bear hug. It's also true that the resulting unity born out of fear was used to justify the embarkation upon two disastrous wars and the unprecedented expansion of the surveillance state. Clinton was not the first American political figure to evoke the day after September 11th as an ideal of American unity worth striving toward. In 2009, 4 months in the election of the country's first black president, as he won the most, 4 months after the country's first black president won the most resounding presidential election in 20 years, then Fox News carnival barker Glenn Beck launched the 9/12 Project. The project was based on a list of 9 principles and 12 values that Beck said were meant to bring us all back to the place we were on September 12th, 2001. The pretty much conservative, and apparently Hillary Clinton's also fever dream of complete unity and complete goodness as a country, where we were all together, we were all united as one, nobody was left out, like, not the Muslim American population who were ridiculed at every turn. So, yeah, he said, we're not obsessed with red states, blue states, or political parties. We are not united as Americans, standing together to protect the values and principles of the greatest. We were united as Americans, standing together to protect the values and principles of the greatest nation ever created. Beck's initiative had a presence at various conservative protests throughout 2009, but it was quickly swallowed up into the Tea Party red wave, even considering our collective tendency, toward amnesia about pivotal events in the history of the United States, like the Iraq War soon to follow. Beck's project was hilarious in its attempt to merge the core beliefs of movement conservatism with America itself. I believe in God, and He's the center of my life. Read one principle. It's what we were all thinking of after 9/11. I work hard for what I love, and I will share it with who I want to. The government cannot force me to be charitable. And one of Beck's 12 values, on the other hand, is, again, charity, which is funny. Hillary Clinton and Glenn Beck are starkly different political animals who share very little in common aside from relentless motivation to maintain relevance. They've been very successful in at least proving that point, not necessarily staying relevant. So even if their reasons for sharing an affinity for the day after are widely different. Clinton, to get back to a time where it was safe to work across the aisle and a significant portion of the country wasn't preoccupied by its loathing of her and her family, and Beck to encourage that hatred even more. What links them is the trust they seem to place in how America responds